fear of the psychedelics have a rational core and also an irrational one, which has been put on by hysteria from the media and the governments and all of that, put on it, came from the 60s, when basically the government, with the media backing it up, thoroughly overreacted and threw out the baby with the bathwater. You know, actually the 60s brought in a love of Eastern spirituality, healthy living, looking after the environment, new music and art. Most of it was very benign. True, there was an element of it being used inappropriately.
Yeah, like there is with everything.
Like which was a pity. But it was really the government's panicking, the American government panicking that the youth wouldn't want to go and fight in Vietnam. You know, the pictures of putting the flower in the rifle.
Yeah.
That panicked the establishment. And so the harms were exaggerated. It's like every death from ecstasy has front page news. Actually, 3 million people a year are dying from alcohol. 5 million people a year are dying from nicotine.
Yeah.
But does one ever hear about those 5 million?
No.
Basically not.
The topic tonight is the hippies, an understanding of whom we must, I guess, acquire or die painfully.
The word hippie suddenly got bad connotations. They're so unrealistic. Where did they come from with this peace and love thing? Now, how did that get twisted? Where somebody was talking about love and happiness and dressing any way you wanted and being totally carefree. How did that suddenly get twisted to be
evil?
I mean, they're just way off. They're bums. They don't want to do anything with their lives. I mean, I find that
it's
phenomenal.
Funny because, I mean, they certainly weren't kind of evil and harmful. One could say they were silly, or maybe they didn't contribute, but in a way they did contribute. They're wanting to contribute a healthy attitude to the environment.
Well, that's what you talked about, food and art and music. It's just amazing.
Yeah. I think the other thing, the establishment panicked. Establishments, ruling classes, don't like the slave caste getting out of control. You know, we like the rulers, we like, you know, the workers to obey the rule and like to go to work in the underground and be good, obedient workers. And no ruling class likes, you know, people suddenly saying, we actually would like to hang out in the sun today or something. Do you know what I mean?
There was no violence. I was enchanted by them. It was the flower power and flower generation. And the people in San Francisco were rather grateful that all these kids, instead of causing trouble, were trying to spread love and flowers.
For people to start in the mainstream having access to these very intense altered state experiences, what's your what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean that's the hoot, isn't it? You know, all of these actually psychedelically naive therapists running ketamine clinics, and you know, and I mentioned it in Recapture, but you know, the classic Hunter Thompson line from Fear and Loathing. You know, we were somewhere outside of Boston when the drugs began to kick in, you know, and they picked up a hitchhiker. Like, you know, like no point in telling him about the bats. The poor bastard's going to see them soon enough, you know. So, like, my sense is when are we going to fucking tell the Muggles about the bats, you know, or the machine elves? Like, we've lobotomized and sanctioned. We've all agreed to go along traipsing behind the MAPS banner of PTSD for veterans, yay, you know, and an improvement for SSRI. But you know, our friend T Ferry, who did a piece at the MAPS conference, a spoken word piece on the trickster element, like the Promethean trickster element of this stuff. It is super duper tricksy. And I think the only sane space, and John, you've been echoing this, but it goes back to Robert Anton Wilson and his concepts of reality tunnels and Korzybski's theories of general semantics, and that kind of just like maintain the trickster in this. And so if I could offer anything, it was sort of the cheat codes to hyperspace. So if it's okay, I'll just read them. There's 8. The game, and this is basically a way to navigate these phenomenologically rich to the point of overwhelming, you know, experiences while maintaining that agnosticism, right? So the game has an infinite number of levels in an infinite number of dimensions. The purpose of the game is to remember you were playing it, and the Greek term anamnesis, the forgetting of the forgetting. The more levels of the game you remember you were playing, the more fun and consequential the game becomes. Higher levels of the game can bleed through into 3D. They often
show through scientific studies that actually these compounds can help us be more creative, see patterns and recognize new patterns and learn from them. Surely that's a very important element for one to realize that these are important compounds. I think it's very important, creativity, seeing reality as it is and putting new associations together so that we are growing, moving, thinking outside the box, improving.
What Amanda Fielding just mentioned, thinking outside the box, being creative, pattern recognition, all of that are actually so-called autistic traits, you know? So it's funny. On one side, autistic people are pushed into behavior modification to fit in better with the predominant neurotype. But then, on the other hand, suddenly you want scientific research that proves why psychedelics can help with exactly tapping into this potential. That's quite a paradox.
Now, the early inventors probably were my kind of mind. One of my favorite books when I was in 4th grade was about famous inventors, things like cotton gin, sewing machine, grain harvesting equipment. It was all very clever mechanical equipment. In fact, the patent office originally required a model. You had to give the patent office a working model. I don't think that would apply to computer programmers. Sewing machine, again, something that's totally mechanical. And the problem is, there's a lot of stuff where we're not making it anymore. I'm very concerned about skill loss. And that's where there's a connection here between what we do in education and what's going on in industry. Well, I've worked in the industry, meat industry for 50 years, spent 25 of those years in heavy construction, where I'd sell a job, design it, supervise its construction. And we've got a real problem. The people that I've worked with that owned metalworking shops have retired. They're not getting replaced. It is a big problem. And in 2019, right before COVID shut everything down, I went to 4 places that made me really concerned about skill loss. I went to 2 state-of-the-art pork processing plants, brand new. The equipment came from Holland.
That strikes me as interesting when equipment comes from the Netherlands. And we know that the Netherlands have a very different approach to psychedelics in comparison to the rest of the world. While the rest of the world is finally catching up on the psychedelic wave, the Netherlands has been ahead of the game for a while now. At least when it comes to psilocybin mushrooms. In the Netherlands, at least the truffles are perfectly legal. And other substances are still less illegal than in most of the world. Psychedelic truffles can be purchased from any of the smart shops. Yeah, indeed, what a delightful moniker. So, do you see the connection here? Creativity. Thinking out of the box. Seeing patterns, associated thinking. And then having legal access to these substances.
This is pretty good. There's no clutter, there's no superego. So there's no social voice or chatter. This is just me as a human being alive on this planet, and dynamically engaged.
Wow.
And so that became a lifeline. And then the combination of that and, gathering wild mushrooms in the back cow field. Oh my God. Thank heavens this exists. Thank heavens that the world is as enchanted as I always hoped. Because the delta between the Hogwarts early experience, roaming through the forest and feeling like, there was literally the land of fairy and Tolkien and everything. And then growing up and getting into the social world and it feeling like it was completely desacralized, that there was nothing worth caring about, being given back that gift and saying, magic is afoot. And if you just pay attention, if you just know where the doors are, that saved my life. Honestly, it gave me something to care about.
I want to challenge the educational system with is there's some really great minds in the past. And what would have happened to them if they were in today's educational system? Well, what happened to Michelangelo today? Beethoven today? Thomas Edison? A lot of people. What would happen to them? This is one of my most important slides. The different kinds of minds. I'm a photorealistic visual thinker and object visualizer. And you know what? I can't do algebra. And I'd be screened out of today's educational system. I do talks all over the country on education. I'm talking to high school kids that can't graduate from high school because they can't do algebra. Well, if I'm going to be a chemist, I need algebra. But for a lot of things, you don't. And we need visual thinkers. We need visual thinkers to solve problems. Another kind of mind is your mathematical mind. A pattern thinker. They think more mathematically. They don't think in pictures. And then you have the verbal facts people. Now let's look at how the different kinds of minds approach problem solving. Visual thinkers are bottom-up thinkers. Concepts are learned with specific examples. I've done a lot of work on improving things in the livestock industry, but it was something specific. It wasn't vague and abstract. A lot of verbal thinking on a lot of different issues, it gets very abstract. I got to have an issue that I can really put my head around so I can do something about it. But the first step is we got to realize these different thinkers exist. The skills can complement each other. Think about the iPhone. Steve Jobs was an artist. That's why your phone's easy to use. The mathematicians had to make it actually work. And I've had some brain scans and I've found out that I've got some big visual thinking circuits. And this shows my lack of working memory. So what am I doing with this piece of paper up here? This is my external working memory because I don't have working memory. It's all full of water. In fact, if I was a computer, I got the Amazon cloud or the Microsoft cloud, the Google cloud, whichever cloud you like the best for graphics files. Huge memory for graphics files. If I can convert it to a graphics file, I remember it. But I'm only a 286 or a 1-bar phone when it comes to working memory. No, I just said, so that's why I have these notes here, because it's my external working memory. Now, how do you figure out in kids what kind of thinker you are? Visual thinkers are good at art, mechanical things. I was good at photography, and this will show up 2nd or 3rd grade. Mathematical thinkers be good at math, and one of the big mistakes it's made is they're giving the kids baby math, and so the math ability doesn't get developed. Another thing about some of these kids that are super good at math is they do it in their head. Don't make them verbally show their work. That's not how they think. We've got a big shortage right now of computer coders. Well, maybe computer coding needs to be introduced to third graders. And then you have verbal thinkers. Love history, love facts. Verbal thinkers, I need them to make my things more linear. Many of my books have co-authors because a visual thinker tends to be scattered, so I need a verbal thinker to make the book more linear. See, that's the different kinds of minds working together. No, we need the visual thinkers. We're the ones who are going to get stuff done. No, so what kind of thinker are you? Would you rather read the directions or look at the diagrams? And in my book, Visual Thinking, I show a lot of studies in there to show that different kinds of thinking exist. And when a kid gets a label like autism or dyslexia or something like that, they're more likely to be an extreme visual thinker, maybe an extreme mathematical thinker. Would you rather look at the map or read the directions? I would much rather look at the map. In fact, I like to look at the whole map before I do the trip so I know where I'm going. I'm not going to just blindly follow the GPS. Now, in science, things have been getting more and more mathematical. When the math gets into the abstract, I can't do it. So in eye gaze studies, let's say you want to explain to somebody how a water pump works, the object visualizer will look at the pictures, the verbal thinker reads the text, and the mathematician tends to look at both. Now, here's an interesting way that students kind of go about doing projects. There's an interesting study done, high school students, art students, science students, which would be more mathematical, and humanities students. And the art students made fantastic planets, skyscrapers coming out of them. Another group made a crystalline planet, another one with palm trees and polar bears on the planet. The science students just drew a round circle, kind of described it, the atmosphere, the gravity. And the humanities students started using words, but then they thought that was against the rules, so they crossed out the words and just made splotches. But the other thing that was interesting is that the art students and the science students had elaborate planning sessions to design their planet, and the verbal thinkers didn't plan. Because one of the things about verbal thinking is very top-down. Okay, so I had a student ask me out in California about social justice. Well, you see, my approach would be something a lot more specific, like maybe using DNA to show that this prisoner was innocent and hadn't committed the crime. You see, that's a specific example. It's not a broad top-down thing. I couldn't believe some of the stuff that was going on in California about energy. I had a window seat going into San Jose, California, and I couldn't believe it. There was very few solar panels on the roofs. And you fly into some other places, and every warehouse is covered with them. I was really surprised at that. When you've got electrical grid that's falling apart, you're not promoting solar panels? Yeah, we need the people like me because when I talk about that, I see it. Yeah, those big warehouses, roofs, that's where they belong. I'm trying to remember whether it was the Dallas airport or the Atlanta airport. One of those airports, the warehouse roof is just covered with them. See, now as I'm talking about this, I see it. Verbal thinkers tend to overgeneralize. So a lot of top-down stuff, that's politicians. I don't want to get into that. But how do we actually get things done? See, I tend to think in a much more specific way. Bottom-up thinking with specific examples of different things you could do to actually get something done.
Well, what's that? How do I have seemingly unlimited motivation in this category and absolutely none based on compliance or oughts and shoulds? And I thought, well, I wonder, I'm probably not alone on that. And what is that? And so that was what kind of led to the study of flow states and peak states. There seems like there's a dynamic. There seems like there's some relationship between peak states and growing into the best people we can become. And it was sort of that notion of what Houston Smith, the scholar of religion, once said. He said, the project is how do we take our altered states and turn them into altered traits? How do we use the peak experiences to actually raise the plateau sense of ability to close that gap? So that's really, I think, the mechanics of how peak states can be so profound. Seeking the purest, cleanest experiences of being.
That's the thing. And I got to thinking just real recently, what is common sense? I think common sense is visual thinking. Because let's say there was a water bottle or something on the floor. Well, I'd pick that up because if somebody steps on it, they could break their ankle. You see, that's seeing it. Common sense is seeing it. So I just want to finish up and say we need to figure out how the different minds work together, where the skills complement each other. But the first step is realizing that different kinds of thinking actually do exist. And I just want to finish up and say the world needs all kinds of minds. Thank you very much.